Hey guys, what's going on? This is Talia Brian. I am a photographer and indie filmmaker. Super excited to be here sharing with you guys today for the Black Writers Weekend. And I first want to thank Tamika for having me on for this presentation. Super excited. So we're going to jump right into it. I have 45 minutes and I'm super stoked to basically just share a little bit about myself, my journey in filmmaking, and a lot of tips and tools that I have learned along the way that I think will be vital to anyone who has interest in the filmmaking realm. So I'll start out by saying, again, my name is Talia Brian. I am 25 years old, born and raised Raleigh, North Carolina, but I've been ATL living for going on 5 years now. And I made a leap of faith. I did not go to school for filmmaking. Actually, right out of high school, I started my business, I launched it, and I moved to the marketplace. At the time of graduating from high school, I was looking for basically anything that I could get my hands on to help my learning process. And it started off as photography, and it kind of moved and birthed its way into filmmaking, where I started to have an interest in turning stills to life. And one thing I want to kind of encourage everyone who will be seeing this now or is watching right now, that it doesn't matter where you start. Take it from me, hear my journey, hear how I started off. Again, I did not go to school for any of this. I went to the School of Life. I went to YouTube University. I went to internships. I gained mentorships. I learned by trial and error. So I would just advise you on the same, not to limit yourself, not to feel like you're inadequate or any less capable of reaching whatever goals that you may have set for the filmmaking world because of what your journey has looked like, what your education has looked like. If you want it, it's out there. And furthermore, because filmmaking is a field that involves so much of the arts, the creatives, and the entertainments. If you can learn the fundamentals, you can strive in any arena, hands down. And so just to tell you a little bit about how I got to a place to be able to even share this information with you today on this platform. Again, I've been in Atlanta going on 5 years now. I started off as a photographer, and I just continued to grow a skill set with mentorship and being a part of an internship with my mentor by the name of Derek Blanks, who's based out of Atlanta. I began to invest in my own equipment. And you start off doing promo videos, you start off shooting events, and then you get inspired to start writing your own stories or creating content. You play with lighting, you become an editor. And these are all the steps literally that I've made over that 5-year span that has got me to a place where now I can comfortably say that I'm directing short films, that I've done a feature film, that I've written my own series to get on platforms. So I'm super excited coming from someone, again, who did not, let's say, had the formal training of a schooling institute to tell you you still can do this with it or without it, as long as you're applying yourself properly. So let's get started. I want to start off with, of course, if we're going to go into mastering the art of being an indie filmmaker, we have to start with understanding what that even means, okay? So understanding indie filmmaking, what is an indie film? Because there is a difference. Indie stands for independent. So an indie film is an independent film that is produced outside of a major film studio system. So anything that you are creatively producing and putting together on your own, that is considered basically independent, when it stands on its own 2 feet and it was not under contract, it was not produced under a large studio name, okay? So what I want to start off with is a biggie. Now that we understand what indie even means, I want to break down what the process of being an indie filmmaker looks like and understanding and enduring that process. So I've come up with some cool little quirky names that if you haven't heard them before, I'm pretty sure if you keep at it, being a filmmaker, you'll become very familiar with these terms. So I want to start off with, just from my personal journey, anyone that's interested in getting into indie filmmaking, you are going to learn the term of a one-man show and what a one-man show means. So a one-man show phase, when starting off, typically you are the cameraman, you are the writer, you are the director, you are the producer, the editor. It's a common chapter to the life of a filmmaker that adds a lot to your plate, but it's super rewarding in the long run. Experiencing the seat of each entity for production will sharpen your skill set. It'll sharpen your ability to delegate and function. It'll help you in understanding every role that's on a set. The goal is to build a team slowly, finding where you fit, finding your focus point in a role that you are strong in, and allowing others to fill in their piece to the pie. So I really want to expound on that really quickly, and just understanding, if you haven't experienced this yet, or if you have, you can totally relate, that when you're trying to get your own dreams, your own visions, your own scripts off the ground, until you have the proper capital or the resources the way that you would like them to really produce your own projects, you're going to be a one-man show. You're going to wear multiple hats. It's a part of the process. But I will say this as my witness: it is the best thing that you can do to your process. It won't always be like that if you keep at it. But honestly, being in a position to be someone that has to wear multiple hats, as draining as it is, it's so necessary to your makings, because it's there that you understand that when you're in position to delegate and to hire to roles that you've had to play previously, you'll know what to say to them. You'll know what type of people you're looking for. You'll know who to hire. You'll know what the pricing point should be. You'll know, what that role entails and what you're going to need in order to bring your project to fruition. So a one-man show phase, you can't bypass it. Typically, if you're put in position to start doing indie filmmaking right off the jump, and you've had the capital and you've had the resources, kudos to you. But just know that if you're in that stage, don't feel discouraged, because it's a part of the process and it pays off heavily later. I've edited, I've been a cinematographer, I've directed, I've had to produce. And now I'm at a point where I'm able to hand off some of those tasks, but I can honestly say that had I not played those positions before I was in position to hire someone for them, I would not know all the ins and outs of how to properly delegate to them. All right, so just keep that in mind. The next phase with enduring the process as an indie filmmaker is finding dependable, free labor. Now, this is a biggie, because dependable is one thing, but when you attach free to it, it gets a little tricky. So it's one thing to find skillful and dependable help. It's another thing to find skill and dependency when you don't have the funds to afford it. This is when collaboration, networking, bartering is vital. Sharpening your craft and ideas to pitch what you can bring to the table. Collaborate in your ideas so it is beneficial for everyone until you are able to pay for labor. And never settle or accept less than in performance from a team that has committed to a job, whether it's paid or not. Negotiating on rates does not substitute any expectation from your team to give their best efforts. So I'm going to break this down, because I've touched on a couple of things here. I've touched on finding dependency, finding a skill set, figuring out how to build a team when you can't necessarily pay them in money yet. And then also setting a standard for the team that you have so that you can protect the integrity of your projects, so that you can protect the quality that you're putting out with your projects. And so I want to start off by just talking about, again, when you're looking for dependable people, but you cannot necessarily afford them in dollars, there are other ways to give exchanges. And that's how you have to think. The same way you think creatively about your films, you have to think outside of the box about your business dealings and your negotiations and your collaborations with people. I used to think that when I didn't have the money, that meant I was limited to putting forth whatever vision, whatever script that I had. That is not true. That is not so. So I'm here to tell you today that until you can build capital, this is another opportunity to grow in your business understanding, in your business pitching, and your business skill set. Bartering is huge. Collaborations is huge. I love something that I've heard Issa Rae say before, if you haven't heard it, and it's like basically that when you're starting off, there are so many people who are looking to climb to people that they're aspiring to be. and seats and positions that they're trying to get to, when really you should be reaching from side to side and working with people who are in the same arena, the same phase of life as you, with the same aspiration and goals. And those people should come together to create and build. And I could not agree more. So I'm going to share that with you guys today as far as strategies that you can take to still build a team and find dependable people, even if you don't have the capital yet to afford it. Because honestly, the same way you may be in a position where you feel like you're skillful, you have the passion, you're at a place where you're ready to create, but you necessarily don't have the dollars, there are a lot of other people that are like you as well. And if you guys can find each other, y'all can form together on that passion, on that skill set, on that desire to just get to the next level and create something beautifully. Now, the biggest thing in your exchange is to bring something to the table. And again, that doesn't always have to be money if capital is something you don't have right now. It's good ideas. It's a skill set. It's the ability to be a team player and to collaborate on dope concepts and ideas and pulling that together with everyone's strengths coming into the pot to make something beautiful. So that's one thing I want to mention on strategies you can take when you're looking for dependable free labor. Now, the other thing I want to mention to you guys is something that I think is going to be very important to your growth as a filmmaker when it comes to building a team, a crew, cast, is to hold yourself accountable and to set a standard. And I want a lot of people to understand that even if you're at a phase right now as an indie filmmaker where you don't have the capital to necessarily pay people what you would like to, you're making exchanges in other ways. And the minute that you make those negotiations with the team, they are expected to perform just as you are expected to perform. So I don't want anyone to feel like you have to accept someone cutting corners because they were not paid. You can respect what someone brings to the table by your approach, by your negotiation with them, by the shared collaboration with them, by everyone having a say so in the creative ideas. And the minute that someone has verbally made that commitment, even on paper, then they are responsible for giving the same effort that they would if they had been paid. And I think that's so crucial, that's so important, and that's something that I had to function within my own company. Because when you don't, you accept less than. And what it does is it jeopardizes the integrity and the quality of your project. And that's what you don't want. What I've learned is that if you can't find team members who can respect what you're trying to do and who can't give their 100% before the deal or before the big check, then oftentimes it's kind of showing you where their integrity stands as far as their work ethic from the start. So why would I allow someone to undermine a project and not give their full effort because it's not in an arena that they want it to be in yet? Okay, you have to start small. You have to do unto others as you would want to be done to. And you would have to make sure that, of course, what you put in is what you're going to get back. So those are my key points there as far as dependable free labor. Again, just to recap, we have a one-man show, finding free labor, learning strategies to negotiate, to collaborate until you have the proper capital to hire a team. Don't reach above you, reach beside you, okay? So I'm gonna move on now. And our next topic is resources and funding when enduring the process as an indie filmmaker. So we already covered two. We've already talked about capital, so I'm gonna put more of my focus on that. Now, when funding your own film projects, it only adds more passion towards executing it exactly how you envisioned it because it's your investment. This is a beautiful way to maintain self-accountability and staying motivated to give your best creatively. It will also stretch your producer abilities in terms of learning budgeting and pushing your networking skills. Crowdfunding, finding investors, personal savings, applying for grants are all ways to get funding and to find it for your projects. So just to speak a little bit more about your resources and funding, again, do not think that when you don't have funding that means you don't have a project, that means you can't move forward with creating and producing your own films. There are other strategies that you can take. However, when we speak on capital and funding specifically, I think this is so important and so vital. When you're spending your own dollars, your whole mentality about your project changes. It becomes your baby in a whole nother way. It will make you more strict. It will raise the bar. It will increase your standards, as it should. Okay, so one of the benefits I feel to being an indie filmmaker when you're spending your own dollars is you don't cut corners. Anything that's yours, anything that's your own, we always treat differently than we would treat someone else's. So I want you guys to take that into account as it relates to being an indie filmmaker and creating your own with your own dollars. And then of course, when you're looking for funding, you can look into Indigo. You know, that's just one of the many websites that exist for crowdfunding. You can find investors. You can go on websites for that. You can use personal connections, visiting networking events. They have something, I don't know, for those who are local to Atlanta, Greenlit, if you haven't heard of that, is an awesome platform and community that has pitching opportunities to raise money for filmmakers. You can do personal savings where you're spending your own dollars, again, which has a super contribution to you just holding yourself accountable and giving your project your best because it's your money that you're spending. And then of course you can apply for grants as well. So that's just a little bit about some avenues that you can take in terms of resources and funding and the benefits to funding your own project as an indie filmmaker. The next part I want to talk about is submitting and pitching your films as an indie filmmaker and what that looks like as a part of the process. So as an indie filmmaker, finding a platform for your work to live or to receive acknowledgement is typically the next goal of a freelancer. You want to value your work and you want others to value it the same. It's totally normal. Pitching your project, whether a pilot, a series, a feature, etc., will all require patience, a plan, industry understanding, and quality content. You want to have something to show and or a really strong story to pitch. Connecting with those who work internally at networks, submitting to film festivals, investing into a showrunner, an agent, or distribution company are all options to help along your process. You really have to understand that the percentage rate, this is a biggie, the percentage rate for mainstream TV does not equate to the overflow of quality content that exists out there, guys. You can build through free platforms like YouTube or even monetize from those platforms. Never wait for a platform to validate your work. This is a biggie. Now, coming from me, I did my first feature film 2 years ago in 2018, and I can rip that experience apart to really help you guys gain an understanding on how important it is you go about your submitting and pitching process, not just professionally on paper, but mentally, emotionally as a creative. The best way that you want to step into submitting and pitching your personal independent films is with a clear mind. And is with the understanding that you are not seeking to put your work on a platform for it to validate your work. Hear me now and hear me well. If you're anything like me, not only am I striving to build on a business standpoint, but I'm looking to grow spiritually. I'm looking to grow mentally. I want to make sure that I am well so that I can continue to create out of a genuine space. And one thing that I've learned as an indie filmmaker is that in order to do that, I have to have the right combination of business intellect with a mental understanding, a mental patience, so that I have love for the craft before anyone else does, and that I am being completely honest with myself, and that I am not pushing to get my stuff seen and recognized on platforms for it to make me validate the very thing that I've created. I want you guys to get that for yourselves. I want you to be proud of what you've done for yourselves. I want you to feel validated in the work that you've done before it gets picked up anywhere, before anyone sees it, before anyone applauds it. It's going to be so important to your mental state so that you can celebrate what you've done. So I just wanted to say that first before I get into technicalities of the business side to things. But just to, circle back around, when submitting and pitching, let's dive into that. Again, you have to have a patience, okay? I've been there, I've done that, I'm still growing. But I've had projects that, you know, you produce a film as an indie filmmaker. It's done. The work has been done. The money has been spent. The blood, the sweat, the tears have all taken place. And then you find out, you know, you could pitch it somewhere and they say, oh, well, we love what you've done here. However, we're not looking for that this season. This is what our audience is gravitating to more. This is what our viewers is looking for. And so what you'll find yourself with in certain scenarios is a great quality film that is not what the market is looking for at the time. And I'm gonna say this is why I say finding that mental balance is so important to your creativity. Because what you don't want to do is put so much passion into something and allow sometimes the season that an industry could be in to make you feel insecure or that something you've created is not valid. That's not the truth. I don't want you to believe that. Okay, so there's also cases where I have pitched projects before, and this time around I said, you know what, before I create, I have intentions of getting this picked up on this type of platform. So let me study this platform. Let me study what they're looking for. Let me study what their content looks like, what their audience gravitates to, so that I can mix a little bit of what I want to create with what they are looking for to make the perfect blend, so that when I finish my film, I can pitch it and I'm in alignment with what they're looking for. These are those strategic ways that you want to start thinking about if you have desires of pitching and getting your personal independent films picked up on, whether that's Netflix, whether it's another streaming platform, just anything. So that's going to be very important. All right, now another thing I want to mention is you can pitch without a film. You can pitch with a very strong script. I will say the percentage is a lot higher having something to show. Even if you don't have the capital, let's say, to produce an entire film, you'll need help with that. But if you can at least find capital to maybe do a pilot of whatever film concept you have, so that when you take your film and your script and your material into the right people, into those rooms, into that internal team or people that you've met, or whether you're submitting through like an online site, you have something to show. Because it's one thing for people to really grab a hold to something that's written, and it's another thing to see how you've produced and brought something you've written to life. Okay, so I hope I'm making sense here. So just to recap, again, finding film festivals is another biggie. It's another huge exposure realm for filmmakers. And of course, don't minimize them. I know we hear about ABFF, we hear about Tribeca, we hear about Sundance, but there are a slew of film festivals out there. Just find the one that works best for you. Find the ones that could be local to where you are and what it is you're seeking out of your project. But film festivals are another great way to get exposure for your project. And sometimes it could go beyond that. It could turn into an exec sitting at that particular festival and finding interest in your work. It could result in your film being selected for a category that has the opportunity to win an award or get some eyes placed on it, where potentially a deal might be sent to you. Okay. So that's one thing. Finding a showrunner, finding an agent, finding a distribution company are all other avenues that come from networking and just knowing the right people. You can also do website searches. I mean, there are tons of websites where there are distribution companies looking for great talent to represent and to service to help get their material picked up on a platform or a streaming platform. Or you can just submit yourself as well. Sometimes you don't need a middleman. Sometimes you can go right to the source. Some platforms have submission links and pages where you can just go submit your work there. I actually just had a web series that was picked up by Freely TV, and that came from me doing a direct submission. So again, there are a lot of avenues out there that you can take. All right. So moving on, embracing the journey. This is another biggie. So breaking the stigma around indie. This is big. One of the adapted mistakes of the industry, in my opinion, is the stigma surrounding independent projects. They sometimes are labeled and often viewed inferior to projects with studio backing. So it stagnates creators, it robs them of appreciating their work fully while on pursuit to bigger network deals. And sometimes those bigger deals never happen, or they are one and done. So my question to you is, are you going to keep creating? I hope so. This does not mean that indie films do not have a place to live and that they can't be very successful, because they can be. Embrace your independent work versus viewing it as an inconvenience or a pit stop towards something greater. How you treat your indie projects is only a direct reflection of what your studio project would look like. And I want you guys to hear me on this. Embracing the journey is going to be so vital as an indie filmmaker. There are some people who want to be an indie filmmaker from beginning to end. There are some who want to be an indie filmmaker because that's the avenue that they have right now to lean on, with hopes of getting pickup or landing contracts with bigger networks. Whatever is your preference, there is no right or wrong, okay? And so I really want to make that clear, because something that I've encountered being an indie filmmaker myself is that in certain conversations, you can talk to people and it's very clear that the notion they have surrounding indie is an inferiority. And what I want to remind you of is it's not at all. It's another avenue to creating great content, beautiful films when you know what you're doing. Indie is just another avenue to creating beautiful films, just like studio and network films is another avenue to creating the same quality. All right. So I just think that's really important to know. Again, going back to mental balance mixed with a creative understanding, mixed with a business skill set. So I don't want you guys to undermine yourselves. I want you to be present for your journey. I don't want you to work on any indie project of your own because you have to right now. Give it your all, give it your best, because this is training ground. And how you go about your independent projects is only practice towards something greater. So if you're not giving your indie projects the best of you, you're not going to be able to do that if you are offering anything larger. All right, so moving on, what I'm going to talk about really quick is the beneficial differences between an indie film and a studio film. Because again, going back to what I just said, there is no right or wrong. There are several avenues you can take to producing great films and getting them out there. Now, I specifically chose to do beneficial differences versus pros and cons, because I really want to make clear and reiterate to you guys that there are no pros, there are no cons. Indie film and studio film are both needed, they are both necessary, they are both great opportunities and great avenues. So I don't want either to feel less than the other. So what we have here are just beneficial differences. So what I'm going to start with is with indie films. This is really great to consider, because understanding these differences will really help you in figuring out what arena that you want to play with. It may be one over the other, or it could be both, but at least now you have an understanding of what each can offer. Now with indie films, beneficial differences off rip is ownership. When you're independently creating a film, you have ownership. That is one of the best top things that you want to have going into filmmaking. You also have creative control in a way that you don't always get when you're dealing with studio film. This creative control means if you're the writer, if you're the executive producer, if you're a producer, the director, you have a seat in the room as it relates to how a story creatively unfolds for a film, because it's in your hands. It's not tied to necessarily a network or a contract that has certain quotas and requirements that you have to meet. So that's a certain freedom that you're giving. That's a certain storytelling range that you have to give. You also have control of the narrative. And all of these bullet points are kind of interchangeable, but they all go back to, again, that creative control and also the possibilities of where you can shop your content. Now, as an indie filmmaker, when it comes to shopping your content, going back to submitting and pitching your films from the previous slide, you have endless possibilities. That is another benefit. you can pitch, you can negotiate, you can see what platforms may be offering you this kind of contract, maybe offering you these kind of dollars versus another. Versus with the studio film, that typically is already under an exclusive contract where what you see is what you get. Okay. However, with the studio film, what you may benefit from there is a studio budget. So whereas from an independent film where you may have to fund it yourself, you may have to work really hard to find investors or crowdfunding, a studio film pretty much is giving you a big dollar studio budget. Another thing is that they give creative input. Now, this is all in perspective that can be viewed sometimes as a hindrance or as of help. When you're dealing in a studio film arena, you're dealing with ratings, you're dealing with views, you're dealing with requirements, because at the end of the day, this studio has to make money. And so though they're looking for fresh ideas, they're looking for creative concepts, they're also looking for what is going to sell, what is going to keep them in business, and what about this film is going to get the ratings and the views that we need so that everyone can profit. So sometimes that's a good opportunity for you to learn a creative input from these execs, from internal teams, on learning the ins and outs of business and not just creative. Okay, I will say this, it's all about your mindset. When I was first starting off as an indie filmmaker, I would hear all the time, I'm sure I was one that used to say it too, I'm not gonna let anyone change my vision. I'm gonna be original. I'm gonna come in here and change the game. I'm not gonna be a sellout. Don't get me wrong. With good intent, everyone should strive to have originality. Everyone should strive to bring something new and fresh to the table. I agree with that. But one thing I had to learn and mature in filmmaking for where I'm trying to go and take my films is that there's a business side to filmmaking. And whether we want to acknowledge it or not, when you're dealing with business, that comes with requirements. When you're dealing with business, that comes with certain structures, where you're going to have to learn how to still deliver creatively, originally, but still meeting guidelines that a business structure needs so that it can continue to generate money. Now, if that's something you're not interested in, if that's something that you're not open to doing, then indie filmmaking may be your lane only. It may not be studio, where you may have, and even with indies, sometimes there are requirements. When you look into film festivals, they have requirements. They have, limitations on how long your film can be sometimes. So those are just some of the things that you definitely want to think about and weigh in and out. Another benefit to studio films is the internal resources and the legal backing hands down. So of course, dealing with a studio, you have studio budget, you have some creative input from people who have been around the block, who have done it, who have a business understanding of programming for television. You have an internal resources, you have contracted cast, crew members, studios, sound stages. I mean, the whole ball game is just very different. And then the legal backing, some of the things that may have given you headaches as an independent filmmaker, the studio has roles and departments that can take care of those things for you so that maybe you can focus more on the creative versus all entities of creating your film. And then of course you have guaranteed placement. So going back to submitting and pitching your films as an independent filmmaker, you're basically shopping your content. You're trying to see what possibilities are out there. But with the studio film, you kind of bypass that risk because you've already been assured a guaranteed platform, which is with that studio oftentimes. And then lastly, money. So going back to studio budget, the money that you get, that's a benefit of studio film. All right, so moving along, we talked about benefits. I'm going to move on to challenging differences. All right, so with indie filmmaking, some of the challenges are finding distribution deals. So going back to what I just shared, there's always a risk with independent films, depending on where you want that film to go, right? You can raise the capital, you can come up with that idea, you can find the cast, the crew, you can do everything perfectly, seamlessly. But now you're trying to find a place for your film to live. That is always that's just gonna be one of the risks that you're taking creatively. So one of the challenges can be finding a distribution deal. Another challenge definitely can be finding the funding. You know, that takes time to raise the funds or to save the funds to be able to bring your own film to life. And then, of course, there's a return on investment risk. Okay, so whether you're doing, let's say, finding an investor, if you have an angel investor, which means an investor who will put into your project without necessarily seeking something in return, that's a blessing. But then you have some that come into it for the business. So they're trusting in you for your film to actually be of success in monetary gain. And so that's another risk that you're taking as an independent filmmaker if part of your funding comes from finding investors. Okay, and then of course the film festival circuit, trying to get your film selected to be in film festivals, you know, submitting, putting dollars in for that. That could be another challenge to get your film's exposure out there. Now, some of the studio film challenges are, it's a business, it's not all creative. So going back to what I shared before, as much as we would like to, as a creative, focus on just sticking true to our vision, having our dream narrative, having our dream cast the way we want it in every way, there is going to be input. There are going to be guidelines on a business standpoint when it comes to studio films, because they have to make sure that the things they're producing will make them profit. Okay, so you have to be willing to be flexible. You have to be willing to be able to bend some of your ideas, some of your creativity, if you want the benefits of having your film distributed through a studio. The film has to successfully meet quota for a return on investment. This is another challenge and another risk. So the same way for an independent film, you're taking a return on investment risk, you also take it with the studio film. Because again, a studio is giving you the money up front, the budget to produce it, expecting in hopes that that film will make a return on that investment. So they are going to be monitoring the views. They are going to be monitoring the numbers and everything on a back end that would contribute to that return on investment. So it's a risk all around, in round, okay? There's also politics to entertainment, and that will play a factor in the creative development. So sometimes there could be a certain cast that you creatively might envision as the producer, as the creator of a show or film or anything. And there may be, differences in the internal team of a studio that feel like, hey, maybe we should go this route. Maybe we should use this actor because of their name. We should write off of that instead, or this would be a better pick for where we are right now for the season that we're in. These are all elements that you'll have to deal with when looking at doing studio film. And then lastly, a potential contract breach or a debt being owed. And that deals again with that risk on having a return on investment. You could have a great idea, you could have a wonderful script, a great film, but it's about those numbers at the end of the day for a studio film. And that's gonna, in ways, determine the longevity of your projects, is how well it did and how much of a return it made. So when I talk about enjoying your process and not being so headstrong on getting out of being an independent filmmaker to get a deal on a larger platform or with a network, I mean that, because I want you to value your work regardless of the amount of views, regardless of the numbers that had to be reached. Because let's say in a worst case scenario, there wasn't a return on investment, that a studio lost money and did not make money like it intended to, and now there could be a debt owed, or now there's not a contract renewal. You still have to know that is business, that is seasonal, that is political, and that does not always mean that what you created was not good. There's so many other factors that play a part into filmmaking on a business standpoint. Okay, hope I'm making sense, guys. I'm almost done. So I kind of want to recap with you, and I want to just share some personal experiences of what I've learned about indie filmmaking. So hands down, it's a process, right? We just finished talking about that. Being an indie filmmaker is a process, and value the luxury and creative control while still seeking larger platforms that will later come with guidelines. Every side of film offers its challenges. Just maximize the space your creative lives in and give it your all. So again, be present in the moment, embrace your journey of where you are, celebrate yourself creatively while you're still on pursuit of that next level and that next level, okay? Decide how much your passion is worth. Is every deal worth your creative? Are you open to bend or collaborate on your vision? And I say this because going back again to those differences between independent filmmaking and studio filmmaking, if you were to want to pursue a deal that could be on a larger platform, just understanding what freedoms you may be relinquishing in doing that. So you kind of want to find out early, what kind of filmmaker are you? What kind of independent filmmaker are you? Are you okay with sticking with doing projects that are solely on you, in your hands, as far as the writing, the narrative of it, the producing of it? Are you open to other platforms, to executive producers who are willing to put the dollars in, but for input in exchange with creative differences? Okay, so these are all things to think about. And not every great film is produced with the studio, and not every studio produced film is a success. Just create quality that is true to self and convicting. Your audience will be there. Okay, going to box office is just one avenue. Going to a streaming platform is just one avenue. Going to YouTube is an avenue. Going to exclusive websites is an avenue, okay? There's so much content out there beyond what's mainstream on television. Do not make that your end all be all right? Moving right along. I just want to give some quick tips really quick as I wrap up, guys. I hope you were able to gain something from this today. But some of the biggest quick tips that I could give being an independent filmmaker is to build a team. You want to build a team. You want to have a few people that you can call on when it comes to producers, when it comes to your crew, just keeping a roster somewhere nice for yourself. Actors maybe that you wanted to collaborate with, find somewhere where you can archive them. This is something that I've done that has worked really well. Everyone's availability may not pan out when you're in the middle of producing a project. So if you can just find a list to keep and build those relationships now to build a team, that's going to be vital. And that's going to be your anchor as an indie filmmaker, okay? Because at the end of the day, again, studio films are able to help more so with that internal resource of, we got the project, we've got the budget, we've got the team for you. When you're independent, these are things that you have to figure out for yourself. So always connect, always reach out, whether you're on social media, connect with the person, see how you guys could work together, let them know what you're trying to build, and just keep these people somewhere archived on a list. So when time comes, boom, you have people that you could call on. You also want to establish a system for your productions. So again, going back to creating that list, finding people that you've archived when you're ready to go into a production is going to be vital. Self-funding and learning to budget creatively. So my tips for self-funding and learning to budget creatively. When you're self-funding, you're saving your own dollars. Just make sure you pan that out properly, okay? And then another thing is, sometimes you don't have the luxury of not having funds being a hindrance to not producing a film. So what I'm saying here is, you have to learn how to budget creatively. When you're in production, when you've greenlit your project, and for those who don't know what that means, greenlitting your project means you now have the capital to move forward from paper to actual execution of a film. So sometimes you got to learn how to stretch your dollars. Sometimes you have a very tight, strict budget and it has no wiggle room, but it's time to get this project done. You're going to maybe have to creatively change some stuff that you originally intended so you can still produce your project and keep it within the budget. That's learning how to budget creatively. So if originally in my script, I had a scene that was in a high school, in a school that required a classroom, that required a courtyard, a school bus, but let's say I didn't have the resources or the funding to get those specific locations. I may have to change my script around in areas so that I can still accomplish the overall message, but in a new way that still keeps me within my budget. Okay, so that's going to be a quick tip that I would give on learning how to budget creatively. Think outside the box. Not every time you didn't raise the money that you wanted to means, oh man, now I gotta wait. Sometimes it could help stretch you and bring you to find new solutions with the budget that you do have to work with. All right. Creative discipline. Oh, this is a biggie. This is a biggie. So creative discipline kind of goes hand in hand with that budgeting, right? Creative discipline means when you have dollars, especially as an indie filmmaker, which typically means you have self-funded or raised the funds, put in blood, sweat, and tears to raise that money, okay? You want to make sure that every dollar counts. You don't want to waste a scene. You don't want to waste a shot. You don't want to waste a day. You have to have creative discipline to stay on task. Sometimes as a creative, when you're creating films, we get engulfed in the creative side. We get engulfed in possibilities. That's a beautiful moment. But however, the further along you get in your production process, you have to start hashing out intentional actions and creating limitations, because sometimes we're in this creative space and you're just thinking endlessly and new things come and you constantly want to change things. You're not really progressing and getting anywhere, because your ideas are constantly evolving and there's nothing that has been set in stone that you can properly move forward with. So it's going to be vital that you adapt some sort of creative discipline in your storytelling. Now, typically these roles are also called like a story editor. When you get in post-production of your work, and this is where the editor comes into place, you need to have creative discipline to, maybe there might have been a shot that you really loved. There might have been a scene that you really loved, but let's say it exceeds the time limit for a film festival you're trying to submit it to. Maybe it exceeds the time that a platform has told you it has to stay within for them to pick it up. These are when you're starting to get into, again, the business aspects, the qualifications that it requires for your content to live somewhere. And you're going to have creative discipline to know when not to be married to certain things, but still accomplishing the overall goal without compromising your quality and your message. So I hope I'm making sense here, guys. And then next, you want to celebrate your work. Hello, celebrate your work. Like, you've put in work. You want to celebrate it. You want to be present for every moment. You want to know your voice. Again, not everybody wants to be, wants to work to do studio films. Some people may want to stick to independent films. Some people may not want to collaborate on their independent films when it comes to, let's say, the writing portion or the narrating part of it. So you need to know your voice, know your niche, know what you gravitate towards. Me personally, I love humanitarian films. I love films that convict and focus on just the human side of people. I love Black people. I love Black stories and Black culture. I love love. So for me, this is hands down my arena. This is where my voice lives. So you want to find that for yourself as well. And then start with the end in mind and work intentionally on your projects. So for example, going back to that experience I shared with you where I did a film and I wrote from my heart. I didn't know anything about pitching. I wanted to pitch it to Netflix actually, but I did not do any prior research on what Netflix was looking at. And so one of the risks that I took and lessons learned was that I need to start with the end in mind in my writing and my development of a project. I need to study the places that I want my work to go on. I need to look at the quality of content that they have up there, the kind of content they're looking for, so that I can intentionally start with that in my mind on a project, okay? And, things that help you do that is to just analyze, where's your film going and what is its purpose, all right? So those are my quick tips, guys, on being an indie filmmaker, mastering it. Again, my name is Talia Brian. I am owner of Fashion Prodigy. You can follow me on Instagram here, Talia Brian. I also have my business page, Fashion Prodigy, and it's actually Prodigy, Prodigy. And then you can also visit my website, www.fashion-prodigy.com. I want to thank you guys again for joining me on today. I hope you learned something. You actually can go on the site, because what I will do is be leaving a free PDF document on how to create your short film. So for all indie filmmakers out there who would like more fundamental step-by-step information on how you can produce and make your own short films as an indie filmmaker, I will be presenting a free document to you that you can find after this presentation on the website. So guys, thank you again so much, and best of luck on your journey as a filmmaker. Bye.